Well, welcome to Culture and Christianity. We seem to have survived the blizzard of 26, or at least the first one. God has kept us, yay. This is also the one-year anniversary of President Trump's inauguration. And it seemed like a good opportunity to reflect a little bit on what's happened and where we are, some good, still plenty of challenges remaining. There's a line that I use frequently, and I think I'll use it for our theme today, that God is moving. God is moving in the earth. He's moving in our congregation. He's moving in Middle Tennessee. God is moving in the earth. I say that a lot across a lot of different platforms, and I'm always a bit curious. It is challenged. People come up to me or send me emails or communicate in some platform and say, Pastor, you like to say that God is moving. I don't see it. Why do you say that? So I want to take a few minutes with you and unpack a little bit of why I believe God is moving in the earth. I'll tell you first and foremost, I think our vision is too narrow. We tend to think of it in terms of a revival service, or maybe increasing attendance in the congregation where we worship, or I don't know what those imaginations are, baptism numbers. But God moving in the earth, in my imagination, really has to do with God restoring expressions of righteousness and godliness and biblical values and biblical worldview, finding their way back into practice in our world and being celebrated in the public square. For a long time, we've been watching those things diminish in about every imaginable place. And I'm grateful to say I see God moving, and I'm going to list some of those for you. But I want to start with a couple of passages of Scripture that I think are appropriate for this season. One, I think, has been a pretty accurate diagnosis of our culture for a good many years, certainly in a very brazen, bold way, since we first heard about that virus from Wuhan coming our way a few years ago. It's Isaiah 59, verses 14 and 15. It says, justice is driven back and righteousness stands at a distance. Truth has stumbled in the streets, honesty cannot enter. Truth is nowhere to be found, and whoever shuns evil becomes a prey. The Lord looked and was displeased that there was no justice. I would have to say in recent years that justice seems to have been driven back, and that righteousness has stood at a distance, has often been mocked, certainly not welcomed into the public square, not welcomed into conversations about conventional wisdom. That truth had stumbled in the streets and honesty cannot enter in. There's so many expressions of that. Our time is limited. I don't want to rehearse all of that. I think it almost becomes like a doom loop, and I don't want to get caught in that. I am very optimistic. I am in the midst of a hope cycle. I'm not stuck in a doom loop, but I think we have to recognize what's happening. You know, my father was a veterinarian. Many of you know that. I spent my early years trailing around behind him. I had this little game I would play. When my brothers or I were fortunate, we would get to go on calls with my dad when he treated horses, so you had to go to where the horses were. So if you got to go with Dad, it meant there was a car ride to a farm or a barn or a horse barn or a stable of some description. And then you'd meet whoever, the farmer, whoever's working at the barn. They would tell you there was a horse. They'd give the symptoms. And then we'd go look at the horse, and my dad would begin an evaluation. Well, this was the game I played in my head. It didn't take me long. I kind of got familiar with how my dad would do the diagnosis. So I began to build my own diagnosis. And then I would wait and I would ask questions before he got to the part where he was going to administer treatment to see if my diagnosis lined up with his. I'd prescribe my own set of medications that I would have given if my diagnosis was accurate. But in that game I would play, I came to a realization that getting better, healthy, begins with a good diagnosis. If you can't make a diagnosis, if the symptoms remain unclear, if the cause of the disease process can't be determined, then you can't reverse the deterioration. But if you can understand what the problem is, if a horse is lame and you can figure out which leg is causing the lameness and which joint in the leg is the problem, then you can decide how to fix it. Well, so I often think that when we have something that doesn't often feel like good news, but when there is some fundamental problem exposed, it's the beginning of a good diagnosis. And that's hopeful to me that then we can get to a solution. Without the diagnosis, all we know is we're in pain or we're sick or we're uncomfortable, and we don't really have any hope for getting better. So when I see massive fraud being exposed, I mean, initially, maybe in Minnesota, $10 billion or more in fraud, primarily in the Somali community. None of us imagine that's the limit of the fraud. California will have exponentially more fraud. It'll be in other states. Now everybody's kind of freely admitting across both aisles in the political arena that as much as 10% of our annual budget is being fraudulently stolen. Just taken 10%. If they're admitting that 10% of the budget is being stolen, I think it's a pretty safe concession that the numbers are probably at least twice that. And this isn't about political parties or ideology. If you're a socialist or a communist, you don't want 20% of your budget being stolen. You want to use the resources for where you intend them to be directed. Well, rather than be just terrified by that or filled with rage about that, I think there's hope in it. If we can identify that fraud is taking place on that kind of a massive scale, I believe there will be a response from the American people that say it will demand a change. We'll demand more accountability from our politicians. 40 states in the last few days have been involved in this winter storm across America. There will be any number of states and cities declare states of emergency and request disaster relief from the federal government. It's wonderful to have the affluence to be able to do that. But before one federal dollar was dispersed for emergency relief, I would like there to be accountability for where it is going to be spent and is it spent in that way. At some point, we have to stop hemorrhaging cash. But I do believe that the diagnosis is the beginning of a very hopeful future, so that when Isaiah says that truth has stumbled in the streets and honesty can't enter in, and then God rather supernaturally exposes massive fraud, I believe that if we will pray, that we will see God help us bring a resolution. What's challenging, the most challenging to me, is the avalanche of misinformation. It's like some giant magic trick. And I don't mean some occultic magic trick. Magicians use sleight of hand and to try to distract you in order to make you imagine they've done something that is physically impossible. And I believe the people that manage most of the messaging that cascades over us depend upon misdirection and sleight of hand. Don't pay attention to this, look at this. And in trying to distract us, they shape a narrative, they shape our votes, they shape our attitudes, they shape our fears and our aspirations. And tragically, the church has been too influenced by this. You don't have to be a historian to get to this, folks. How long did we live with the whole notion of Russian collusion? That when Donald Trump was first elected to the White House, it seems like a long time ago now, they immediately began saying that he was a puppet of a foreign government. I hadn't been close to President Trump. I'm still not close to President Trump. So when credible sources began saying there was an abundance of evidence that said we had an elected president that was a puppet of a foreign government, it gave me pause. And then we listened to that drumbeat day after day, week after week, month after month. There was a special prosecutor assigned. The attorney general recused himself from being involved. After months and months and hundreds of millions of dollars in all the investigation, it was a fraud. The basis of the entire narrative was a document that was paid for by opposition research from the other political party. And the media sources won Pulitzer Prizes for reporting on Russian collusion. They were celebrated for journalism that was based on fraudulent information, and they didn't care enough to do the research to prove it to be wrong.
You don't have to look far to see that our economy is in real turmoil. Our nation is $37 trillion in debt. Inflation rates made it hard to buy and sell a house, even a car. We're all feeling it. When you go to the grocery store and you spend an extra dollar or two on every item, that gets personal in a hurry. Well, the most important thing we can do during uncertain times is to invest ourselves in knowing God better. Read His Word, pray. That's the only place we're really going to find stability we need for the disruption that I'm pretty certain is ahead of us. Beyond that, it's just plain wise to make the best decisions possible in our daily lives with our investments. When you think of all the options out there, gold is an investment that has stood the test of time. That's why I work with Preserve Gold. They've treated me with honesty, integrity, kindness every step of the way. They're offering a free wealth protection kit, and all you need to do is text Allen, that's ALLEN, to 50505. As a bonus, you'll get up to $15,000 in free gold and silver with a qualified purchase. Go ahead and text them today.
So we live in a season where maintaining perspective is really difficult. Now, the good news is there are so many outlets like this. There are podcasts. A decade or more ago, podcasts were still a novelty, and now there are millions of people every week that are listening to podcasts. There's programming I'm a part of and in other places where the truth is being told. It's helping to expose the lies. Another one we watched for months and months and months. We were told our border was secure. We had the Secretary of Homeland Security look in the cameras on multiple occasions and say the American border is as secure as it's ever been. It was a bald-faced lie. There were hundreds of thousands of people on a monthly basis coming across our border. And then we heard similar deception from Christian leaders. They say, well, an open border was an expression of compassion. Baloney, it's a Greek word that means I disagree. That open border was not an expression of compassion. The estimates are the minimal number was 400,000 children, unaccompanied minors, were trafficked across our southern border. They've disappeared. We don't know where they are. It's not compassion to have hundreds of thousands of children sold into the most horrific imaginable conditions. So the challenge we face in the midst of the season is how do we navigate the messaging that's coming at us? How do we orient ourselves in position in regard to that to see what God is doing? Not simple, not easy, but I'm not looking for easy. We've done all the easy we need to. We have determined here that we're going to do the difficult things, that we're going to overcome our addiction to comfort and convenience. And we will make challenging decisions that will bring a better future to ourselves, to our children and our grandchildren, and we're not relenting from that set of decisions. If you're watching or listening to Culture and Christianity on a regular basis, you know our commitment is not simply to comfort and convenience. I'm not opposed to them. If I can be comfortable and enjoy convenience, I choose that. But I'm not going to forfeit my future or trade my character for the formation of those things. We're going to do some difficult things to get to a better place. So I've made a bit of a list of how I think God is moving in our midst. There are things I've shared in some other formats and some other places. Some of them you may have heard me talk about. But as a means of celebrating what God has done in this last year, I don't imagine that any person or any political party could have caused all this to happen. But it's remarkable to me that God has chosen this season and using this current administration to accomplish his purposes. They are an odd lot. They're not a group we would have imagined would have worked together. They haven't even celebrated biblical worldviews, all of them, and yet they are implementing policies that are allowing the purposes of God to come forward. I read you the verses from Isaiah 59. Let me read one more verse. It's Proverbs 14. Verse 34, it says, righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a disgrace to any people. Righteousness is a fancy word. It's about right standing with God, the ability to be in the presence of God without guilt, fear, or shame. It's not about which church you go to. It's not about your vocabulary words. It's about your relationship with God. But it says that righteousness exalts a nation. It's more important than our economy. It's more important than our academic systems. It's more important than our inflation rates. I'm not saying those things aren't important. I'm telling you, as people of faith, we have to believe that the Word of God is valid and truthful. And if you accept that, then righteousness is what will exalt a nation. All of those other things will extend from a people whose hearts are committed to righteousness. I wonder if we have the courage to say that we have been a bit co-opted by secularism and that we've had aspirations for ourselves or for our children or our grandchildren that weren't rooted in desires for righteousness. They were grounded in the same things that are aspirational for our secular pagan friends. See, until we can face those issues, we don't get to a better place. How many of you listening have children or grandchildren and your aspirations for them is they would serve the Lord? I don't mean on Sundays with their bottoms in a pew in a church, but they would orient their lives into ministry. Doesn't have to be preachers or pastors. But do you have aspirations that the highest possible expression for your children or grandchildren would be to serve the Lord with their lives? You know, it seems to me that we've almost lost that from the heart of the contemporary American church. That's a tragedy. Some expressions of God moving in the earth. I don't want to get lost too far on that. One to me that I think we have to celebrate is abortion, overturned by our Supreme Court, telling us it is not a federal right, that it does not exist as a right in our Constitution. They didn't ban abortion. They didn't eliminate abortion. They simply said it was up to the individual states, but they did remove the notion that it's a federal right grounded in our Constitution. That's a wonderful curse to have removed from our nation. Now, it's tragic that 60 million or more children have lost their lives while we sorted that out, but it's a tremendous victory. It is not an intrusion into women's health care. The life of a child is not focused on women's health care. There's a whole host of decisions to be made prior to pregnancy, and it's not just a women's issue. You know, the men have enough wisdom to understand that if you're involved with somebody and you don't want a child, then don't be engaged in the behavior that causes children. If we lose that integrity in the church, it's a false church and we're apostate. We can't sit in the church and behave in immoral ways and then say Jesus and spell grace and think we will avoid the consequences for our ungodliness. And I think we all saw an expression of the grace and mercy of God when our Supreme Court made that decision around abortion. Another thing in the public square that was unimaginable to me was the leaders of our nation helped define marriage again as between a man and a woman. You know, I think it was Bill Clinton, President Clinton, that signed the Defense of Marriage Act, that it really made a matter of federal law that idea that marriage was between a man and a woman. And it held for a few years. I believe it was the Obama administration that overturned that, and that we had watched that grow in our culture until it was enormously confusing. We have Supreme Court justices that have trouble defining the biological sex and understanding that. So marriage had become an open discussion. Well, biblically, there's no uncertainty around this. So when a biblical definition of marriage is pulled back forth into the public square, folks, that's not a political discussion. That's a biblical worldview issue. And the church should be leading on that conversation, not politicians. Politicians should pick that conversation up because the voice of Christians is so loud and so numerous and so overwhelming that they want the support of that community. We've hidden from it for a whole variety of reasons. Another thing that we have seen in the public square is an administration that was willing to say men should not compete in women's sports, to try to bring some common sense to this discussion between men and women. We are not the same. We are different biologically. We had lost our minds. I mean, it was being on a regular basis stated in the public square that women can do anything men can do physically. We weren't even referring to women as mothers. They were birthing persons. We were beyond the level of absurd. And this administration and cabinets and administrative work helpers have been willing to bring back some sanity to this discussion. God is moving. That's protection for our children. It's important. Our border has been secured. No nation can survive with open borders. We cease to be a nation state if that is allowed. Tens of millions of people have come into our nation illegally. Any behavior that begins with illegal should be troubling to all of us. If you make illegal withdrawals from the bank, that's troubling. If you do things illegally to get better grades in school, that is troubling. If you put gas in your car and you take it illegally, I mean, illegal is just a bad description of a behavior that follows. And illegal immigration should be troubling to all of us. If we want to change our immigration policies, let's do that. We're a nation of immigrants. All of us understand that. But illegal has been devastating, and that has been reversed. Our border is the most secure it's been in many, many years.
Well, you know, I'm delighted to tell you about one of our sponsors. To be completely honest, we've declined a number of people who wanted to sponsor our podcast or something we were doing. But Ancient Nutrition isn't just a sponsor. It's actually a product I use. Jordan Rubin's a friend. We were at a Christmas event a little over a year ago, and I happened to be seated near Jordan, and I kind of confessed, I need to get healthier. A few days later, he showed up in my office with an eating plan and a box of ancient nutrition products that he said, you need to put these into your routine. And I did, and it worked. I didn't exactly completely disappear, but I got a lot healthier and stronger and had the energy to complete the assignments before me, which have been pretty intimidating lately. So I want to recommend it to you. AncientNutrition.com. They're multi-collagen protein and a whole menu of products. If you go to AncientNutrition.com and you just use the promo code Allen30, you get a 30% discount, and you can start this year in a healthier way for more productive outcomes. I think it'll be a blessing to you.
The list goes on and on internationally. You hear me frequently talk about the debt I believe we owe to the Jewish people. Doesn't mean I agree with every policy that the modern state of Israel embraces, but I absolutely believe that the Jewish people have a right to their historic homeland in the Middle East. And we have seen in the last 18 months remarkable changes come to the landscape of the Middle East. On the borders of Israel in the north was Hezbollah, with hundreds of thousands of missiles pointed at the heartland of Israel, most of them either Iranian or Russian-made, and Hezbollah has been dismantled. They're a shadow of their former self. They were a proxy for the Iranian regime. They were terrorists that enforced Iranian threats on Israel and other populations around the world. On the southern border of Israel was Hamas, another Iranian proxy. And Hamas has been almost totally annihilated. The Iranian nuclear threat for decades. Iran had threatened, as soon as they had nuclear capabilities, to destroy Israel and to attack America. And the Iranian nuclear threat has been marginalized, at least for the time being. Those things were unthinkable 24 months ago. And today they're an accepted part of our landscape. Venezuela, who had been under the hobnailed boot of communist authoritarian government in Maduro. Maduro's been removed. Now, the opportunity in Venezuela is not complete. Maduro's vice president is in control, and so that authoritarian government is still very much there. The enforcer under Maduro is still in place, terrorizing and disappearing people from the street. But there is a promise that Venezuela will find, and the people of Venezuela, greater freedom. You may have heard me share in another format, I shared it in services, that at the end of a Saturday evening service that weekend when Maduro was removed, I've just been quietly saying to the Lord, what's the response? How do we understand this? And at the end of service that night, a couple came to me, a couple I know in the church. They are Venezuelan. And they said, would you speak to a friend of ours? And I thought they had a guest visiting them at church. And I said, sure. And they reached behind him and they held up their phone. There was a pastor in Venezuela that wanted to speak to me. There were tears running down his face. And he said, Pastor Allen, I wanted to thank you. I wanted to thank the American people and thank the administration for the freedom that you were helping to bring back to Venezuela. He had such a tender heart. It gave me the response I knew I'd been asking the Lord for. A few days later, a friend sent a video to me of hundreds of pastors and faith leaders being released from Venezuelan prisons and being reunited with their families. The breeze of freedom blowing through the land of Venezuela. Do you read C.S. Lewis? I hope you do. I hope you've read C.S. Lewis. I hope you've read all of the Narnia tales. They're not children's books. They're a beautiful, creative presentation of the gospel. I was a boy the first time someone shared one of those books with me, and the first book I ever got was a copy of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And I remember reading that story with fascination about my introduction to Narnia at the back of the wardrobe. But this land that was in a permanent state of winter, and then the king returned. I mean, many of you know the story. If you haven't, I don't want to spoil it completely. But winter was brought to an end and hope was restored to the land of Narnia. And when I see what happened in Venezuela, it feels like to me the warm breeze of freedom blew across the land of Venezuela. And there's a hope that the long winter they've been living through could come to an end. God is moving. I think the same thing is happening in the streets of Iran as I'm taping this. There are hundreds of thousands of people in the streets demanding freedom, that warm breeze of hope blowing across a nation that has been totally captivated by horrific expressions of Islam. And perhaps God will bring freedom to the people of Iran. We have to pray. It's an important time. I believe that same warm breeze of freedom is blowing across the island nation of Cuba. Perhaps God would restore freedom to the Cuban people. Wouldn't that be amazing to watch? We're praying that for Nigeria, where there's been a systematic genocide of Christians, that freedom would come there. Wouldn't it be wonderful to see freedom come to the oppressed places in the world? Folks, God is moving in the earth. I'm often surprised at how he does it and whom he uses to bring that freedom. We did an exercise with our staff last week. We identified people in this current administration who were affiliated with changes in our culture, some good, many we celebrated, some we didn't understand, but simple things like Bobby Kennedy Jr. that's worked so diligently to change our diets, to upset a food pyramid that had been very destructive for us. It hadn't been challenged by the medical community, by the AMA, by all those licensing organizations that we would look to watch over our well-being. But Bobby Kennedy, a Democrat, put in the administration of a Republican presidency, has been fighting for decisions that have brought putting milk back in our kids' schools. What a thought. Who knew highly processed food wasn't good for us? Who would have ever imagined that Doritos didn't contain essential nutrients and vitamins to make us healthier people? I don't really think we needed Bobby Kennedy to help us sort that out, but I'm very grateful for his courage. I believe it won't be long and we'll see autism rates changing in our children. It's phenomenal to me, the list of all the things God is doing. Economically, our energy prices are the lowest they've been in a long time. The United States has moved in a year's time from being energy dependent upon foreign nations, oftentimes nations that were our adversaries, to not only being energy independent, but we are energy dominant. We are helping dictate the flow of energy in the world, which is really good news for our future and our children and our grandchildren. Interest rates have come down. Inflation rates are down. Our productivity is going up. Our GDP is at really completely unexpected levels. There are so many reasons for optimism. Now, evil is not banished. You know, we have riots on the streets in Minneapolis and Minnesota. And we watch those reports, and I think the latest update, there have been 2 deaths. It's awful. It is horrific. But it's completely unacceptable that citizens are being encouraged by elected leaders to disrupt the enforcement of federal law. We cannot flourish in a nation that does that. If we lose respect for the rule of law, we will lose the freedoms and liberties that bring the best things to our lives. Again, I choose to see it more like a good diagnosis. We've all had the imagination that sanctuary cities and sanctuary states were just kind of like safe havens for people who were a little down on their luck. They were often our most beautiful cities or our most celebrated cities. And isn't it precious? They're sanctuary cities. And what's being exposed is that's not the case at all. They are cesspools of fraud, the lawlessness, the violence, the hatred that's been promulgated by the leaders in those places is unacceptable. Well, once that's exposed and we can see it, we can begin to pray. We can begin to demand more from the people that are elected to us. I don't respect those people protesting with their whistles and all of their tools and their organization to disrupt the enforcement of our legal system. You know, we saw them in other settings. We saw them on college campuses, our most celebrated college campuses, Columbia and Brown and Harvard, you know, protesting the genocide in Gaza after Hamas attacked innocent Israeli citizens. And yet there have been none of those same protesters back in those very familiar sites at Columbia and Brown and Harvard when the Iranian people are being slaughtered by the thousands in the streets by an authoritarian Islamist government. I didn't see those protesters on our southern border when there were hundreds of thousands of children being trafficked into sex trades. So I'm not impressed with them now that they're in Minnesota telling us that they're a voice for the disadvantaged. The lack of integrity, they clearly have an agenda that is the diminishment of our nation. But the exposure of that, it's so clear. You don't have to be addicted to the news or addicted to social media to understand there's a problem there. It's been exposed. So now that we can see it with some clarity, we can begin to pray what Isaiah invited us to, that truth will once again be found in our streets, that if you shun evil, you'll be celebrated. You won't be preyed upon, that righteousness will be embraced again and not ridiculed. You know where those things really have to begin? It's in the church. Our churches have been afraid for too long. We won't talk about the kind of things that I've talked about in this podcast because we're told they're political. I don't agree. I think the things that we're discussing in this podcast are cultural issues. And what our desire, our assignment as Christ followers is to see our biblical worldview, that Judeo-Christian worldview, impact the world in which we live. We are called to shape culture, not be shaped by it. And that means we have to have the courage to talk about these things. We don't need to be angry or belligerent. We certainly don't need to be violent, but we shouldn't be filled with despair. I think there is a tremendous expression of hope. The litany of things that have happened in the context of a 1-year period of time, if we had written them down in December of 2024, would have been unimaginable. Only God could have brought these things about. And he's brought them about through the most unlikely group of characters. Oftentimes we try to discount the good that is happening by focusing on things we don't like about the individuals that are involved in the delivery of those good things. It's not a helpful practice. I'm not telling you that everybody involved in the current administration lives like a saint, but I'm telling you there are some biblical issues that are being addressed with a boldness and a courage that have been absent for a long, long time. And for that, I am very grateful for the leadership we have at the moment. I pray for them on a regular basis. In 2 Timothy, where we're told to pray for those that have authority over us, the prayer that we're invited to pray is that we may live quiet lives in all godliness so that we have the freedom to proclaim the gospel. You know, the individuals God chooses to use for that isn't totally up to us. Our prayer is that we can lead quiet lives in godliness with the freedom to proclaim the gospel. And we have greater freedom and greater opportunity to do that today than we have had in decades. God is moving in the earth. I still have friends that are working through some very difficult problems. I have people I care about that have challenges to their health. I've been doing a series with the congregation here on miracles and healing. We can't lose sight of the fact that God still moves in our world and in our lives. We have to trust him for miracles and the supernatural. We're not going to outthink evil or outwork evil. We're not going to out-politic evil. We have to understand the power of God and how to welcome it in our lives.
You know, around the world, people are searching for truth, and together we're doing our very best to help them find it. When you become a ministry partner with Jackson Ministries, you're joining a growing community of believers who are committed to strengthening the church and sharing God's word through every available channel. Television, radio, podcast, books, Bible studies, digital resources, conferences. Your monthly partnership helps us equip believers to reach new audiences and to take the hope of Jesus to people who may never have heard the gospel otherwise. Together, we can stand firm in our faith and make God's truth known, right here at home and around the earth wherever God opens a door. Let's keep gathering His people and building His church until the day our King returns. You can find more about becoming a ministry partner at alanjackson.com/partner.
I want to try to focus this and put a bow around it. I don't want you to be filled with despair. There are expressions of evil in the world. Christianity is still the most persecuted religion on the planet. But there are expressions of deliverance for Christians in any number of places in the world. The breeze of freedom is blowing through our world in a way we have not seen it in a long time. There are some common sense values coming back to bear in America. We understand that authority over our children's lives should belong to parents, not to teachers' unions, and certainly not to the presidents of teachers' unions. That our college campuses should not be indoctrination centers. It's okay if there are places where there's a diverse array of thought, but it should not be indoctrination. You should be able to express a biblical worldview on a college campus and not be treated punitively, not punished for that. We can't accept this. We can't accept college universities, Christian universities with Christian in their name that hold values, employ faculty, and put in principles that are against biblical worldview. All of that's being exposed. It's being changed. God is moving. Yes, evil exists. The battle isn't finished. It won't be finished till the king comes back. You know, that's why Jesus is coming back. First time Jesus came, I'll close with this, I promise, there's hope. You know, on a weekend, if you're on campus, your hope that I'll stop on time is the nursery. There's all those wonderful volunteers taking care of babies. And if I go over, it is not a blessing. You don't have that leverage on a podcast. I apologize, kind of. But God is moving in the most remarkable ways. And if we can recognize that and cooperate with him and say yes to him, I believe we'll see change in our hearts, around our kitchen tables, in our churches, in our communities. God hasn't left us. I was telling you about Jesus. That first time he came, he was a vulnerable baby in a stable in Bethlehem. And only the supernatural engagement of God protected Jesus from the hatred of Herod and any number of other threats. When Jesus comes back the second time, he's coming back in a very different representation. He's not coming back as a vulnerable baby. He's coming back as a conquering king. He's coming back on our behalf. Between where we are now and Jesus' return, two things will happen. Biblical. They're prophetic principles, but they'll both happen. There'll be a proclamation of the gospel, gospel of the kingdom in the whole world, unlike we've ever seen. And there will be a rise and expression of evil with greater threat against the people of God than the world has ever known. Jesus will come back because without him, we wouldn't survive. The good news is he's coming back for us. So let's get busy with the proclamation of the gospel of the kingdom. God is moving in the earth. I want to move with him. I'm willing to change, to learn, to grow, to adjust my habits and my patterns, to humble myself and repent. I'm not trying to blame somebody else. I want to cooperate with the Lord. And I want to invite you to do that. I believe between now and the beginning of next year, we will see God move in even more dramatic ways. And I want to be a part of that. And I believe you do too. Lift up your head. The Lord's coming back, and we have reason to celebrate. Thanks for joining me today. Before you go, please like the podcast and leave a comment so more people can hear about this topic too. If you haven't yet, be sure and subscribe to Alan Jackson Ministries' YouTube channel and follow the Culture and Christianity podcast. You can do that on Spotify, Apple Podcast, wherever you get your podcast. Together, let's learn how to lead with our faith. We can change our culture. I'll see you next time.